Hey guys, I'm gonna play some poker and drink some wine, talk about some decisions, and then put it on the internet. Playing very, very small stakes on Bovada poker. On Bovada you play with anonymous screen names, so I have absolutely no idea what any of these other people, like who they are, where they're from, etc., etc. I can guess that a lot of them are from the States or Canada, because I think that's where Bovada's market is mainly. I think I can fold that. And I do have some like sort of aggregate stats about how the population plays, which are over here. And like if I'm doing something particularly unusual, I will mention them. I am going to be making quite a few like very large adjustments based on some stuff. Like buttons, for example, are only opening 30%, which is like possibly half of what buttons are meant to be opening, so I'm not going to bother defending my blinds very wide, as an example. And then perhaps consequently, or perhaps because it's just another symptom of the same problem with people not adjusting to position properly, blinds are not defending wide enough, so I'm going to be opening for a steal much wider than is proper. And then like post-flop wise, people just don't seem to be folding much. So I'm certainly going to be value bet heavy unless the board seems very, very favorable for bluffing on. Or I have a hand which is just very good to bluff with. This is an example of a looser small blind open. This peel is pretty mediocre. I'm going to check back, and now I can just check down, but I was planning to fire the river rather than trying to bet the turn. I think that a lot of people check call with aces on the turn. And I was actually probably going to fold if he bet there. Yeah, so I think that justifies my play somewhat. Guess I shouldn't have fired the river, I don't know. It's not a very good line for him to take with that hand, in my opinion. It's not a terrible one, though. I would even go as far as saying that is one of the like game 3 optimal acceptable lines to take with that hand. So I take it back, it's totally fine. I think that I would tend more towards checking the flop if I didn't want to bet more than one street. But like, yeah, I guess there's nothing wrong with betting flop and then checking down. Just trying to collect money from my floats. And it would have succeeded had I not hit a jack. This is an example of a board which I think is just too good for me not to see bet it. King high board. I've really got absolutely no idea what this bet means. It's a donk bet. I opened a early position and the big blind called me. It wouldn't surprise me if it was just an ace which didn't want to let a free card roll off on a monotone flop. And when I get check raised on that board, which I just got check raised on, king 8-6 rainbow, yes. I don't know what the guy's hand is. For value, he's repping like 8s and 6s, and I think that, I mean, he's a random player, so I can't say for sure he doesn't have king 8 or king 6 as well. Can't say for sure he doesn't have kings or aces. I just don't think that I need to be bluff catching much at all in these games. I'm going to raise this pretty much just for value. That's interesting. I'm going to fold it now. You could perhaps argue for just calling that, given that buttons are going to tend to be opening tighter ranges, but I think that they... It's probably just a call. I don't know. I think it's a fine 3-bet if I assume that I play post-flop better than him and have better frequencies as far as 4-betting, like such that I can just fold very, very comfortably to any 4-bet and don't expect him to 4-bet often. That's the wrong pop-up. I haven't like labeled any of this stuff, I've just put a ton of information into it. Calling here seems okay. Squeezing seems fine as well. If I didn't feel like calling with this hand, I would consider squeezing it. If I didn't feel like doing either, I would fold it and be happy about that. I think that I could have let out flop, and I can bet here, just try to take somebody off 10s. This is basically what I'm targeting with this bet. I don't have to make this bet, but my hand is so likely to be a very good hand on the next street that the bet increases significantly in value. If I end up with a flush on the river, I would rather have had more than one bet go into the pot, so the bet works pretty well for me in the scenarios where I make a flush, or a straight if I hit my gut shot, or a straight flush. I think I had a straight flush draw, right? And it also works pretty well for me just as far as protecting my hand if somebody has 2 overcards, stops them from hitting an over, and possibly bluffing. So it does a whole lot of things, that bet. And I think probably it does enough that it's a good bet. This is an example of a flop that I would just check fold, where I think that in a normal game you would try to do something with ace-8 of clubs here, with backdoor flush draws and over and backdoor straight draws. The hand just has a lot of potential as far as selecting it for a bluff combo. So I think that you can c-bet it or check raise it potentially, but the check folding can't really be bad, and especially against people we don't think are folding enough post-flop. I think it's good. I think that people fold too much pre-flop and not enough post-flop, with the exception of in 3-bet pots facing 3-bets, people call too much and then fold too much post-flop. So, complete opposite. There are like a billion hands that I am ahead of here, so I'm just calling twice. Just far, far, far too many hands that I beat with ace-king high on that board for me to fold against a random person. Like a good player will recognize that and not bluff with enough hands that he ends up having a frequency, which is making me like pretty indifferent to calling ace high on the turn and river. But I assume that these guys are just going crazy. I think that limps in the small blind they seem to be very, very weak. In fact, limps in general at these games seem to be very weak. There isn't much limp re-raising going on at all from what I can tell. Just checking down ace queen, and I might call a bet depending on how the texture changes. C-betting is another way to play that hand, which I think is probably fine. I could open ace-3 suited there. 3-betting is also very passive. People don't 3-bet enough pre-flop. That's one of the reasons that they end up folding too much pre-flop, I think, that they are just folding hands which are meant to be 3-bet bluffs a lot of the time. This is an example of a spot where I would definitely defend this against a player I knew was a good player. I don't know that this guy isn't a good player. Might be. His re-raise size is very suspect and like just bad, so probably not, but where's my 3-bet stat? Yeah. I only have the small blind 3-betting the button 7% over the hands that I've played, which is about 40% of what the small blind's probably meant to 3-bet the button. So there is not much incentive for me to put money in the pot in typical situations where the small blind 3-bets my button open and I have a marginal hand. Just raising kings for pure value over this limp. I'm going to open queen 9 suited. It's a loose raise, but I expect to get through this stuff pretty easily. This is actually one of the first limp, might be the first limp re-raise I've seen from under the gun. Like, it can be aces, but I don't have any play except go all in. Alright. 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 That was quite a roller coaster of emotion. Yeah, I mean, obviously his play is very non-standard. I think that you can make an argument for having a limping range under the gun, and I've actually thought about this a decent amount because I've been working on mixing my ranges pre-flop, trying to raise bigger with some hands and raise smaller with other hands, just because I think that some hands would prefer a bigger pre-flop raise and some would prefer a smaller pre-flop raise. And as long as you, I'm going to call this because it's like a miniature 3-bet, I can't fold getting that price, like 15 cents to see 3 cards, and now I can check fold on this texture. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so some hands want like to raise $1 pre-flop at a 25-cent big blind table, and some hands, I'm actually just going to check this, like I have a gutter, but I don't think I have a ton of fold equity here, and the hands which do fold, I think we'll just check on the turn. Hands like pocket pairs below the board, for example, I can get them off those eventually, I don't have to bet the flop. Some hands want to raise $1, some hands want to like raise the minimum. 2 examples would be a hand like ace queen offsuit really doesn't want to see a multi-way flop, loses a lot of its value on a multi-way flop, and it has very good blockers protecting it from getting 3-bet by the sort of premiums that people 3-bet, and also by the sort of bluff hands that people choose to bluff with when they 3-bet. And it can raise to a large amount and still get called by hands which it dominates, like someone will still call with ace 10 suited, for example. So while you might want to raise ace queen offsuit for a fairly large amount, there are other hands like 6-5 suited, for example, which is quite happy to see a multi-way flop, and also quite happy to play in a pot where stacks are very deep relative to the size of the pot. So you don't want to always raise 6-5 suited one size and always raise ace queen offsuit another size, at least not against people who you're playing against regularly. But assuming that you like mixed it up, say raised ace queen offsuit 60% of the time to 4 big blinds and 40% of the time for a min raise, and did the opposite with 6-5 suited, it seems to me like it could be a better strategy than just raising both of them to 3 big blinds. So if you're going to mix your pre-flop ranges, there are spots in Hold'em where limping is certainly a good play. Limping the small blind against a tough opponent is widely recognized as a good thing to do, at least an acceptable thing to do. A lot of people who don't do it just don't do it because they haven't bothered to work out which hands to do what with. That's the camp that I'm in. Well, I also don't play against good players very much because I'm playing 25 NL on Bovada. So like maybe, given that you can limp in the small blind, you can perhaps make arguments for limping some hands in other places at the table, and perhaps under the gun would be one of those places. It seems like one of the sensible places, because you have 5 people left to act, and they could all 3-bet you if you risk money by putting 75 cents in the pot with 8-7 suited. I think just calling here 3s with a gutter and a pair, you know. And you can argue against some opponents for c-betting this board and basically using my hand as a bluff. Like, I have 2 pair outs and trips outs and backdoor straight outs and backdoor flush outs, so I have a lot of equity in the hand against just about anything. But I think, given that people play poorly when check to 2 and don't fold a lot, I would prefer checking. And he's made it so tiny that I just have to check call down, and cool, that's why I have to check call down. End of that hand. So the problem with the limp re-raise with jacks there, other than that, like, he's sort of ensuring that he gets all of his money in against every better hand, and doesn't really do a great job of stacking somebody with 9s or whatever. This is fascinating. I don't understand at all what's going on here. The problem is that jacks is probably one of the hands that wants a big raise size pre-flop. Like 10s is one of my best possible bluff catches, so it's like, that's why it's one of my best possible bluff catchers, because I block half of the combos of that hand. And his line made no sense to me, so I pressed call. He made the most possible with his hand against my hand, which is great for him. But it's certainly easier to make money when you have trips than it is when you have a hand which is worse than trips but can still call. So yeah, the problem is that jacks is just not a good hand to limp with. So I can safely dismiss that guy's limp re-raise with jacks with half a stack as a pretty bad play. Typically, I'm going to expect people with half a stack to be making worse plays than people with full stacks. And that's because one of the simplest things to understand about poker is that you can only win as much off a player as you have in front of you at a table. So if I think that I have a skill edge against this table, which I do very comfortably, I should always rebuy in up to $25 so that I can win as much as possible. And there are sort of corner cases where that breaks down. But this is not one of those corner cases, playing anonymous tables at Bovada at 25 NL. And the statistics that I've gathered on the population back up that conclusion. I'm actually going to open 7-3 suited here. I'm really tempted to open 10-4 offsuit, but it's a little iffy. Here we have slightly over pot. There are just a ton of draws on this board. Tons of gut shots and straight draws and flush draws and backdoor flush draws and stuff. So even though I have about the worst made hand I could have, I'm just like very, very happy to get the money in on the flop. I actually don't hate his play with 6s, honestly. There are so many draws and the stacks are so shallow that getting it in there isn't ridiculous. It's not as good as his other options, I don't think, but there's some sense to it. And it's possible that it is actually his best option against an unknown player. But I certainly haven't looked at the math enough to prove that. Tempting to 3-bet this. I'm just going to call it. Tempting to 3-bet this. I am going to 3-bet this. This guy may very well be... Nope. Yes. Yes, this guy's the person I just won against with sixes, so I expect him to get in a lot of hands which I actually have good equity against after I make this raise. This is unfortunate. This is like never a light 4-bet, I don't think. Like not ever, ever, ever. So I'm going to raise on the river. It's actually a little bit tempting just to call. No, I'm going to raise. I would never do this as a bluff at these stakes, like ever. I very nearly timed out, which would have been unfortunate. So yeah, if I don't think that he's ever calling with a worse hand, the rake is actually so terrible at this site that just calling gets considerably better. Here I'm just going to be check calling with ace queen with the ace of hearts. Ace of hearts makes that a very easy decision. So he just like donked at me 3 times. Okay. This is why the ace of hearts makes check calling much more appealing than check folding. Here I think that I have a few good options. I'm going to try and overbet a bluff here. Huh, that's fascinating. The troubling thing about that is obviously not that he, like, rivered a set on me, because that's just ridiculous, but it is that he instantly called in a spot where I very clearly was not representing that I could be betting a worse hand for value. Like, my bet size was very, very clearly and deliberately chosen to represent flushes. And the reason I chose that bet size was that I was turning ace high into a bluff. And if I'm going to do that, I want to make sure that he folds some good hands, because ace high already beats some stuff. And like, the reason I was turning ace high into a bluff was that I had the blocker for the nut flush, so I greatly reduced the number of flushes that he could have in his range. Again, just a miniature 3-bet, so I'm going to pay 50 cents and see 3 cards, and then I'm going to check and fold. I wouldn't be surprised if mini 3-betting and then c-betting flop was like a very, very profitable line at these stakes. It's certainly reasonable that I should have just checked, given that people in this population don't fold as much as they should to bets. Probably that was a better way to play that hand. Talking about the ace-queen hand again. Here I'm just trying to check down with a jack. I'm gonna call one. I'm not gonna call this one. Am I though? I want to show you guys quads if he has them. Okay, that's a fascinating bet. Not a very good one. Yeah, I don't know, man. I guess he was bluffing. I don't know. It's just really, really hard for him to have a queen there. Like, even though he can play a ton of queens that way, possibly every queen he has he can play that way. Still hard for him to have a queen there. And it looked like he thought he had a queen. And I thought that there was a bigger chance he was misreading his hand than that he actually did. So this pot got like pretty big for these stakes. And I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to it. Somewhat because I'm drinking. This is like one of the only good 3-bet spots in the game, I think, button versus cutoff. Unless you have a hand which can fire a lot of flops, like I think 8-6 suited, for example, is a pretty good in position 3-bet. But yeah, that's actually one of the only spots where I think that people fold as much as they're meant to 3-bets. So I'm not too surprised that he folded when I had 2 kings in my hand. Like, what could he possibly have in his hand if I already have 2 of the kings? I'm not actually going to open 5-4 suited. I think that it's much more appealing to open big card hands, given that people are not folding enough post-flop and are folding a lot pre-flop. Here, obviously, I have queens. I'm not necessarily calling down, but I have to call 2, I'm pretty sure. That's fine. It's pretty much what's meant to happen. Here I'm just trying to check down 8s. Looks like I'm succeeding. He had the 8-5 suited. Here I'm just gonna check down ace-jack from here. I'm gonna call a bet on the river. That's like, what? I mean, that's a very, 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 very bad hand to bet the pot with by him. Here, facing like a 5-cent bet to play in a 60-cent pot, I can raise or call. Given that I was planning to check this hand against 2 players anyway, I'm pretty happy to check. At this point, I'm going to start betting. At this point, I'm going to check again. I might win. Nope. The turn bet was like... a lot of the turn bet was for value, basically. And I have 10 outs against a lot of the hands which call me, which are ahead. And against the hand which he actually had, I had 7 outs. Wait. No, a jack counterfeits him, right? Yeah, so I had 10 outs. Well, 9 outs, because there was 1 less jack against the hand he happened to be calling with. So that's like totally fine. The fact that sometimes he has a pair of 10s gets balanced out pretty comfortably by how often he has a flush draw or a queen jack or a jack 9 sort of hand, which is drawing to a straight of some sort and is behind ace high. Another under the gun limp. No reason really to think that that's strong. Checking this 3-way. There's no way that I have enough fold equity. I actually have a top pair, so I'm going to bet for value, I think, for the first time tonight. I don't really recall having a good hand. We get 2 folds, which is not the worst, obviously not the best. Certainly make more money in lines where I get called once on the flop with king jack there. I'm going to open queen 3 suited because buttons don't play wide enough. and blinds don't play wide enough, I'm going to check this hand. Very, very, very little fold equity on this board. Everything has a gutter or an open and a straight draw or a pair or a flush draw, and I don't think I have to bluff catch. King 3 offsuit was a very, very bad hand on that board. It's easy to think that King high on an ace-side board has value, but it certainly didn't in that spot. Alright, I'm getting 3-bet with queens again. People are just not 3-betting very wide at these stakes, so there's no reason to get it in pre-flop. There's absolutely no reason to raise. All I do is like force him to fold ace-king, which has 6 outs against me, and it's not terrible if he folds ace-king to a raise, but I'm not excited about it either. Like, I would much prefer him to just keep bluffing with ace-king. And, like, the real problem with raising is that I never make him fold kings or aces. And he doesn't have jacks or tens very often because they don't 3-bet pre-flop. So, yeah, it's not a terribly exciting bet. The only merit to it is a little bit of protection. Just gonna bet with my top pair here. People open the small blind pretty tight, too tight, but I think that I can play here, and I'm gonna bet second pair for value on this monotone flop, expecting a lot of clubs to call. I don't think there's a huge amount of reason to stab here. What do people do after checking? Small blind, check fold. I don't know what all this crap means. Check raise, check call, check fold. I've been check folding a little bit in my sample, but not enough. I have a 4 now. Like, I don't know. That's not very good. Yeah, that's fine. So the result of that hand was basically that I got to realize all of the equity with King 4, established that I had a terrible hand on the river, and then folded. Which is not bad at all. King 4 is going to have enough equity against pretty much any range that somebody can be opening from the small blind for that to be a good deal. Let's take a look at exactly how much equity we have. I'm squeezing 8-7 suited, expecting to get a call a lot of the time. 4-bet very, very rarely. Probably only one time in 10 I get 4-bet there. This one I can fold. Alright, so small blinds seem to be opening like 30% or something. So let's give him that range. Give us King 4 offsuit. So we actually have 40% equity against that range. It's pretty solid. All I need is 33% to make it a call, assuming that I realize all of my equity, and in position against a bad player, I think that I can realize almost all of my equity. This is a spot where I could consider leading the turn to, well, I don't even know if I want to get into that. I'm going to check raise here. I'm going to bet this, like, fairly big. Well, that is not the best turn for me. I'm going to check, hope that he hits a pair with, like, king, queen. Yeah, exactly. Try to get 1-bet out of him on the river. I think the check raising is far, far better than betting on that flop against this population. But no, I just think it is. I don't think that they will fold an ace, and I want to get 4 bets in against an ace instead of 3. And getting 4 bets in instead of 3 against an ace is just such a big deal that I don't think anything else is even worth considering. Bets are scaling geometrically in the limit hold'em because you typically bet like 3/4 of the pot, and the pot gets bigger every time another bet goes in. So the 4th bet is very, very large, and there are a lot of aces in people's ranges pre-flop. Here I'm just trying to check down with 5s. I am now playing the board. He insta-checked. I don't think that he'll fold a chop. Here I'm going to start betting with trips. He's actually very short. I'm going to check and let him hit a pair on the turn. Now I'm going to check raise. Okay, and I'm going to check raise. Okay. So he just didn't improve to anything that could call me at any point, most likely. This is a very, very, very standard check call, I think. Typically, if you check call, it's very hard for you to have a flush on the river. Typically, you want to check call with second pair anyway, so like both parts of this hand really love check calling. And here I can choose between check calling and check folding, and I'm probably going to check call. Okay, that's a pretty good hand. I think that he played a fine. I actually think that these shorter stacks, like, yeah, I think that they play tighter, if anything, in the blinds, and that they don't raise when they should. Sorry, I just timed out there. That's not ideal. So I actually think that while theoretically you're meant to raise the button tighter when you have shorter stacks in the blinds, in these games the opposite is going to be true. Just checking down my 7. Alright. Yeah, and people are just playing very, very badly post-flop. Here there are a ton of reasons to c-bet this. Just going through them real quickly, I have queen high, so I don't beat a whole lot, especially not a showdown. I block king queen. I have a backdoor flush draw. I have backdoor straight draws. This is not a good turn for me. Oh, also the board is just very, very good for a c-bet. There are a lot of hands which miss this board. I'm going to call again. I called flop just with a backdoor flush draw, and I would have certainly considered bluffing if checked too, but I can't call with jack high, and I don't want to raise. I don't think that raising is ever going to be profitable in any situation in these games. Raising on the river. Oh, unless I have like a strong hand. So here he's leading almost pot. I have second pair, just like a very, very standard hand to be calling with. Very, very standard value bet. Okay. Here with 8s, I think I have a sort of an odd bet going on here and here. I think it looks enough like I'm just stabbing to take down the pot that I can get looked up by a lot of hands beyond just a queen on the flop. I really have not gotten many calls when I have had a hand tonight. consider defending this. Just punishing the cutoff limp. Super standard. I'm actually going to fold this hand, I think, to this play. 17 cents. I think that I have to call, but the fact that he doesn't have very much money at all in his stack shifted me further to what's calling. Here, options are bet or check, and both of them are defensible. Betting gets me protection and maybe a little bit of value against flush draws. Checking, like, gets me closer to showdown. That's basically the idea. I'm just gonna check fold on this river. Okay, that sucks. That's like the worst part about betting, when he just has second pair and I give him money. So this guy's donking turn for a little under half the pot. I think that my hand was a good flop c-bet because of all of the potential it has on a lot of turns, of which that is not one. Certainly don't need to continue to play that hand on that turn. Here I'm going to call a 3-bet. Here, like 2 people in the pot, I'm just throwing my hand away as soon as somebody bets. Here I'm going to 3-bet with 7-6 suited, which I think is fine. Not amazing, but okay. Here we're getting an awful lot of checks. This guy I'm ahead of, this guy I'm not sure about. I don't need to bet anyway. That's cool. And that's why we check. Checking does not have zero expectation with like any hand. You can always sometimes win a showdown, theoretically. Alright. Alright, well played, Jacks. I don't think that I need to value bet that river, but I'm not sure. I think people probably have a lot of trouble folding their like pocket kings, especially when they think that pocket jacks is a good enough hand to bet twice for. Was that value? I don't know what that was. Here I just have bottom pair. I don't think there's any reason to bluff with it. I don't think bluffing into 2 people here is going to be profitable. I've improved to a like very marginal made hand on this board. 16 combos of king queen in both players' ranges are absolutely crushing me, and a lot of other hands are beating me too. Calling 1/2 pot bet was fine, but I'm just gonna throw my hand away to this min raise garbage thing. Actually, I have 4 outs. 8%. 10%. I think that I probably have just enough implied odds on the river to call. And maybe once in a blue moon, this guy just crazy. I'm gonna do this for you guys. I need to make it big though. This is the wine talking mostly. Cool, so he folded there. I would not typically recommend trying to make players fold hands like that, but I was very, very, very confident there that he did not have a flush. Just the hands that he reps with his turn raise have a lot of trouble having a flush on the river. And it looked like I had a flush. Sometimes the hand history search doesn't work so hot, but it looked fairly convincingly that like I had a flush. Alright, that's my flop. So I can bet or check. I'm gonna check. betting and checking are both absolutely fine with queens. You're meant to do both on this flop. Like, game theoretically, that is correct. Doing either. And I will call. That's sort of fascinating. Alright, I'll go all in. I wonder why he would, like, bet flop and then check back turn. I don't think that checking back the turn makes very much sense with the hands that I expected him to bet the flop with. Let's see if the hand history thing is working now. Oh, yeah, there it goes. Here, I'm just gonna check the river. It's a pretty thin river bet. Queens, ace, king. Yeah, so like 4-betting, well, I think his play is standard except for the turn check. I think the turn check is very, very bad. You can never be that bad. You're allowed to check with ace king there on the turn. Jeez, I keep on having these changes of heart. I would have bet ace king there. I think that if you only want 2 streets, this street to check is definitely the river on that board. In those situations. That's my opinion. But people are meant to play such that if you're going for 2 streets with ace king, you can pretty much pick any 2 and they're meant to be similarly defensible choices. In that spot, I think I have to hedge everything I say because poker's really hard. Okay. I'll call. Just gonna be a super standard check call on the flop. On the turn, I think my options are check fold or check raise. I'm gonna check fold. This guy can have king queen. He can also have like jack 10, jack 9, 10 9. Bunch of garbage. I block king queen. I just have a bluff catcher obviously, but it's hard for me to fold it. On that card, I can go all in. I think all in's too extreme. Alright. I lied to you guys about never raising the river in these games. Alcohol is one hell of a drug. Anyway, I just, like, that play was entirely off the king of clubs blocker. Just very believable for me to have a king high flush there, I think. Here I'm getting donked into. I don't think I need to play this hand. Here I have a king. I'm pretty sure I can get called by worse. Here I'm facing a fairly small 3-bet, but people just aren't doing this as a bluff enough. and my hand sucks anyway. I'm opening the small blind very, very, very wide. I think that over my sample, I don't remember which one I press. Raise success. Small blind opens at 46% success, which is way, way, way too high. So probably I can open any two profitably from the small blind, because people are also calling a very, very large amount when it doesn't succeed. 46% success means that it wins the pot 46% of the time. So on average, big blinds are playing 54% of their hands, although since it's an aggregate player, that's going to be made up of a bunch of people playing like 30% of their hands and some people playing like 80 or 100% of their hands. So the better hands are more represented in that 54%. So it's not like the top 54% of hands, which would look like that-ish. It's like the top 20% of hands twice, and then the next 20% of hands, or the next 40% of hands sometimes. Half as often as the top 20%, something like that. I'm actually gonna bet this. There are a lot of gutters and straight draws and flush draws and stuff that I can get called by. So it's just a value bet, and people just call with complete garbage on the flop post flop in these games. So yeah, when I get called by the small blind, I expect to play against a stronger than usual range, but I won't get called that often. I won't get 3-bet that often either, and I expect people to make a lot of mistakes post-flop, so I can open the small blind very, very wide. The rake is a concern. The rake, I think, is pretty easily my strongest opponent in these games. So I like to, people are meant to flat ace-king here, and certainly flatting king-queen, so I like to c-bet ace-queen, and I'll often 3-barrel with it, just because my blockers are so good. It's a very profitable hand to play by checking or by c-betting. It's meant to be. But when you have all the offsuit combos of a hand, like there aren't that many hands on that board, which I have 16 combos of. I guess it's just ace queen and ace jack. And so when I have 16 combos of a hand, I don't want to be playing them all the same way. It just is going to weigh my range way too heavily towards those hands on later streets. Obviously, this is like a game theoretical consideration, which is pretty silly to be worrying about at these games, but I find the game theory involved in poker to be the most interesting part by a fairly large margin. So when I don't know if checking or betting is better there with ace-queen, I do know that either of them is better than like folding, but I don't know by how much, and I should be doing the one that is the most better than folding. But if I don't know how much, I'm going to play a mixed strategy, because I think that that's what I'm meant to do. There's another situation where I'll want to bet and check some ace-kings and ace-queens. I'm going to be betting with ace-queens and ace-kings with backdoor flush draws. I'm actually just going to check fold, even with such a pretty hand. Just because I had the not worst suits, I think it's okay to check fold ace-king sometimes on that board, and the specific combo that doesn't have any suits in common with the board is going to be the best one to do it with. Gonna bet my 8 when check 2. Very, 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 very bad river for me. And I'm just going to check fold. We just check down an 8 here, which is fine. It's amazing to me that he didn't bluff that river with a hand which was worse than mine. I don't know how that's possible. Let's take a look at what he had, because any ace high makes a wheel. Any flush draw hit the flush. So it's just very unclear to me what he could have been calling with. King, Jack, high. So I would describe that as a somewhat loose decision. Here, I think it's a little hard for him to have an ace. It's not that hard. Here I block a bunch of kings. I have a gutter. It's a sort of board where I can try to make him fold sixes rather than playing my ace for showdown value. And yeah, as in this case, I do have quite a few outs to improve to a reasonable hand. Unfortunately behind ace queen, queen jack, ace jack. So the only stuff I'm betting is like jack 10. Beating is like jack 10, which I block, and which doesn't bluff. So I'm only beating like 8, 7 of clubs here, so I'm just gonna fold. There isn't a lot of time on these tables to explain everything that I'm doing. Hopefully the explanation there got through why I folded an ace on the river to like a relatively small bet compared to some of the bets that I'm putting in with aces. Jacks is a really bad bluff catcher here because I block queen jack, king jack, which are big parts of his proper bluffing range. Yeah, he also limp calls like too many aces. I can just fold this hand pretty comfortably. The reason that I 3-bet there was one, it's fine to take the pot down with ace king. Ace king doesn't have amazing equity against any hand except for like ace queen and ace jack. It does pretty well against, but and king queen, I suppose it has amazing equity against quite a few hands, but I'm gonna like time down and see what's going on here, but I'm not gonna continue with nines, obviously. Here I can bet. My ace high just isn't very good anymore as far as hand strength, and he's gonna have pocket eights a lot of the time. Okay, we had ace 10 and ace 6. Cool. So that's nice to see. 3-betting ace 10 is like pretty unusual, but a little bit kind of defensible. Like it's not, no, it's pretty bad. That's a hand which would certainly prefer to call pre-flop, but potting and like ace queen X flop with it and a 3-bet pot is just absolutely atrocious 3-way on the flop. So I enjoy seeing my opponents make mistakes because those are what make me money. And a lot of the mistakes are sort of more subtle. They're like folding too much or whatever. I think that I can just barely bet this on the turn and check, certainly check this river. Yep, that's a very, very bad turn call. But I mean, that's why I bet a hand which was a pretty bad turn value bet. Theoretically, that turn value bet is pretty thin with an ace and no kicker. I have queen high here. I might win. Nope, didn't get there. Yeah, people like their aces. It's actually somewhat surprising. Okay. Oh, I can just fold this. Somewhat surprising to me, but if I look at fold to flop c-bet numbers on ace-high boards, they're all broken. Oh, well that sucks. I wonder why they're broken. They were working before? Huh. Anyway, what I was gonna say was, seems like people are folding a pretty good amount on ace-high flops, despite the fact that they're like playing every ace pre-flop. I found that a little bit surprising. The reason I'm playing one $5 table is that you can only play 2 at a time and the $10 games aren't running, and I mean honestly I'm underrolled for a $25 game. Certainly don't need to be playing a $50 one. So this is a pretty bad turn for my hand. 3-way. I don't know how much detail I really need to go into on that. I will fold. Maybe I could have found a bluff somewhere with 4 high there. I honestly don't know that I ever had a profitable spot to bluff without people play. Maybe the river. Probably not. Probably not. I don't know where I could have bluffed there. Here, I think check calling with king high on a gutter is fine. We're quite deep. And if I hit a queen, my hand is very well disguised. Plus the queen is a pretty good card for his range. It's going to make him a decent number of 2 pairs and like sets and top pairs and stuff, so I should get more money. I think I can just fold the turn. Alright, so this has been going for an hour. So I'm gonna just like, I'm gonna keep playing, but I'm gonna break the recording up. So I'm gonna play this ace-8 offsuit hand, which I ISO'd for some reason. Seems like a bad ISO. And this king-8 hand, which I can check or bet. I'm gonna choose to bet. Very bad turn for me. His range, I mean, it's like the best turn in the deck for his range. Whoa. I don't know if it's quite like over bet worthy, but okay. So I'm going to be checking strong hands on this turn a decent amount of the time. There's no reason to defend with that one when he starts going crazy. Alright, see you guys in 5 seconds my time. Maybe 5 seconds your time.